Hello, here we
Hello.
are, the Scribe Lounge Labs 2024, third time around. Welcome back, Hayley. Thank you so much for joining again.
Thank you. It's an absolute honor, especially to be first up and open the Scribe Lounge Labs again.
Well, it seemed like a nice tradition. We did such a nice job last time, and it's always such an easy way in. It's we know that what we're tackling, we know where we're going, so yeah, it's always really nice. So thank you so much for joining again. And I think in terms of subject, I know we talked, we wondered what we were going to talk about for this to kind of kick things off, and actually, I think it's a really great subject because I think it really does apply to everybody, doesn't it?
Yeah,
No matter what your position, this applies to you.
yeah, absolutely. If you work with scripts, you're either giving notes or receiving notes, and often both. As
Yeah.
both writer and scripted development professional, you will end up in both positions. So yeah.
And what I found through the years of Scribe Lounge is just how important it is to give notes as well as receive them, because I think it helps you to receive them. You know what I mean? In giving them to other people and knowing how to deliver them and not only sort of verbally, which we'll talk about, like talk about how to actually deliver them, but how to put your notes together, what to look for, and it gives you a kind of greater sense of what somebody else is looking for in your work, doesn't it? It really can help.
Yeah, I think it's hugely valuable for writers to develop that skill to read scripts and give notes in a really constructive way.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing that only occurred to me thinking about it for this lab is that as a scripted development professional, where you're often giving notes to writers, of course, you're also in the position almost always of receiving notes. You know, if I was working on
Awesome.
a show, I'd be getting notes from a series editor and a series producer and an executive producer. And even now, as an executive producer in a production company, I'm getting notes from commissioners and co-production partner EPs. So we're always in both positions, which is really interesting.
It is absolutely. I was having this conversation the other day with one of the script editors I was working with, and she was saying about the important role that they have as she has as a script editor because she feels like she feels like a mediator, between the two. You're getting it down from above, you're trying to digest it, and then you're trying to find the best way possible, which is what we're going to talk about, the best way possible to articulate it to that specific writer so that they can digest it, they can take it on board, and they can actually do something with it. It's like it's not always just one person to one person, is it? It's a queue, is what I'm saying, I think.
Yeah, and it's also so critical, not just to the material in terms of the draft that comes back when you're a
Yeah.
script editor, or how able to implement the notes you are as a writer, depending on how well they've been given to you. It's also really critical in the relationship, which is at the heart of all screenwriting and scripted development. It's about building a relationship. And so being good at both giving and receiving notes is a
And it's going to
really
be
critical part of the job.
and it's going to be critical to the outcome of the work as
Yeah.
well, right? Because if
Yeah.
you fundamentally are not very good at taking on board any kind of feedback or it just always gets taken the wrong way or you don't know how to digest it, then the work is ultimately going to suffer because this is a collaborative medium. Well, television, well, it all is really, regardless of your medium. It's always collaborative, right? You need to be able to respond properly.
Yeah. I hope you're always is as a writer, what you hope your writer is feeling is like it's just fresh eyes, right? You got
Yeah.
really close to it in the writing process. Because and you should be deep inside it. And so the person who's going to give you notes is it's just a little bit of distance and fresh eyes on it that if you'd have had a bit more time, you probably would have come up with a lot of the same thoughts as well.
Yeah, enough time spent thinking about it. Well, let's dive in then and kind of break it down a little bit. Okay, well, let's start with receiving notes then. So, from the writer's perspective, anybody watching this, we're all going to be in that position. In terms of things we should think about, is one of the things to start off with, perhaps thinking about who is giving this note to you and where it's coming from.
Yeah, and why? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think so. Because I think the kinds of notes that you're going to receive and what you want from those notes is going to vary depending on the context. Um, so I think if you are writing on spec, which, you know, a lot of our writers will be, James, for you and I, at both Script Angel and Scribe Lounge, your writer's writing on spec. And so it is actually hopefully, a really free process, because I would hope that the aim of that person giving notes on that spec has been invited by you, the writer, right? So you don't need to take the notes on board if you don't want to, right? There is no
Absolutely. Yeah.
commission, right? You haven't been paid. You're writing on spec, and you're seeking feedback, whether that's with us or with peers or whatever it is. And so I would hope that the person giving you feedback um, has got a real kind of like purity of intent at heart. So the commercial shouldn't matter unless you want it to matter. They should just be there to give you notes that make it the best version of the thing you want it to be. And part of that
Yeah.
process might be helping you figure out exactly what it is you want it to be, and then
Yeah.
helping you make sure it's really clear on the page. But it should be a really pure process when you're writing on spec in terms of the kinds of notes you want.
Absolutely. I
And,
remember
and,
once,
and
I
you're in that
can't,
lovely position. Sorry, I was going to say, of like,
no, no.
you potentially don't have to take them, right? Again, it's the freest experience you'll have
Yeah.
because you've sought the notes. And so if you don't like them, you don't do them, which is lovely.
You put yourself in the firing line, haven't you? You know,
Yeah.
I can't remember who it was. I think it was Brian Koppelman said once. He always likes to find the distinction between what are you asking for? Are you asking me for feedback? Are you asking for notes? Because feedback in his terms, obviously, these terms are going to mean different things to different people, but he thinks as feedback as like a reaction. I'm going to give you an emotional response. I'm going to give you like how it feels and where it's sitting and a response. If you want notes, I will give you notes. Like I will go into detail and he sees that as an extra thing. And it's just important for the writer to know what they're asking for because he said, I've given writers notes before and they've been like, whoa, whoa, what are you that's not what I didn't need this kind of detail. And so it's important to know what you're asking for and likewise who you're asking it from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think both you and the person you're seeking the notes from being really clear about the intent is super important, because then it will
Yeah.
really help you both be on the same page.
And also I found it's also important where they stand within the industry, like whether they are in the industry, whether they are writers, whether they know anything, or whether you're giving them to friends and family, because that's very different, isn't it? To give it to someone who doesn't know the industry but knows you very well can often be tricky because they might not know what they're looking at, in a sense, you know?
Yeah, I think so. And I think also I love when writers seek peer feedback from other writers. Um, and I think we might touch on this a little bit more later, but it's just something to be aware of when you're receiving notes from a fellow writer who will be very creative themselves. Being able to filter out notes from them, if they're not experienced at giving feedback or notes, that make it different, but not necessarily better, because it's just what they would do with this material or premise or story or world is
Yeah.
really important, because it takes a lot of skill, particularly if you're very creative, to read a script and not try and turn it into the thing you would like it to be or you would write if it was yours.
Absolutely. And that's something we'll obviously cover in more detail as well when we get to giving feedback. But you're absolutely right. I think it's so easy for writers to sort of immediately click into oh, this is how I would do it. And I find myself having those thoughts when I'm giving feedback to people. And so therefore I try to make sure that if I am giving an example, it is very much an example. So I'll try and make that example as crap as possible so that it's not something that's going to be taken literally. It's just proving my point. So say, for example, it's like, okay, they've got a lead character who is doing something, but they don't seem to have a motivation as to why they're doing that. So my example would be, well, for example, what if something happened in their past that gives them an emotional effect towards that thing that they're trying to do, thus giving them motivation. Don't use my example because it's crap. Think of a better one that relates to you, to your character, to your world, but that's proving my point without being like, okay, what if you make Jimmy a pilot or whatever? But it's tough, isn't it? It's not easy to do.
Yeah. And I think as the receiver of feedback, particularly as the receiver of feedback from either peers or people who are inexperienced at giving notes. It's just kind of part of it is on you to kind of filter for that and have itinerary for that and be aware that that might be what you're getting,
Yeah.
whether it was what you thought or not. And the other thing I was just going to kind of talk about briefly, because obviously the spec script feedback is fantastic and like I say, super pure, which
Yeah.
I love about it. And it's a really, it's, I know it's a frustrating process to position to be in as a writer because you want to be being optioned and paid and commissioned, but it's also really pure. And it's the one time where you can seek feedback that just helps you make it the best version of the thing you want to be without any other considerations. Whereas when your work has been optioned, or you've been commissioned and you're in development, or you're going into production, then the context of those notes are really different. And the way in which you need to respond to those notes is going to be really different. I just wonder whether it's worth kind of like talking about both of those a little bit.
Absolutely. The way you phrased it when we were talking about it was you said, do they have a stake in it? Which I think is really important, right? Because you say you take them to a bunch of your peers, or you do a session on Scribe Lounge or something with a bunch of other writers, and they don't have a stake in it because they're all got a stake in their own scripts and they're just doing you a friendly service. Whereas, like you said, being in development, they've optioned it for a reason because they really care about you as a writer and hopefully the project. They wouldn't go ahead with it, right? Um, and it definitely dawned on me when I started doing professional work in development that realizing, oh, they just want it to be the best it can be. Because I remember my first note session being like, oh, holy crap, they've really got an opinion on this, and I can see how their visions might be totally, they can't see what's in my head. So my job is just to get whatever's out of my head and make it as clear as possible. And their job is to help me find that clarity. But yeah, the realization was we're all on the same team. Everybody wants it to be the best they can be, don't they?
Absolutely. And you would hope if it's a good development process that the people who have optioned it and who are giving you feedback because you're in development now want to make the show that you have written. And I think those early conversations about intent
Yeah,
are so important that even if there are things that need to evolve and develop about the material, that you all signed up to a North Star is
yeah,
my preferred kind of way of thinking of it. Like, what is it that is most important to you about this work? And is that the thing we think we've optioned? And as long
yeah.
as you're aligned on that, then you can be quite open as
Mm,
the
mm.
writer to that development process. But it's also just worth bearing in mind that the person who is giving you notes has a stake in it in the sense that they also need this development and the work that needs to happen on the material to lead to a green
Yeah,
light or
yeah,
finance if you're in futures, right?
yeah,
So they are going to have kind of commercial concerns coming in because ultimately they need to be able to sell this project. And you would hope
yeah,
that they feel they can, otherwise they wouldn't have optioned it in the first place. But there might be things that kind of have to slightly reposition it or slightly dial up a genre element in it, for example, to make it slightly more
yeah.
commercial. So it's just worth kind of being aware that they're very close to the market and that is going to have an influence on that
Yeah.
creative process.
Absolutely. And their job is to make it a reality, right? So they're just asking, how can we make this a reality? And without it feeling like a battle. And because I think that's the common misconception sometimes is that writers at early stages get quite defensive about their work because it's rightly so, because it's personal and it's hard to hand something over. So immediately when they think, oh, a producer gets involved, it's like, I'm battling against the producer and they're going to want to turn it into their thing. And it's like, well, no, we want them to be on our side. And say when we get to the commissioners, we're going to talk to some commissioners later in the week and we'll get this from them as well, whether how they want to be on your side too. But it just comes down to what you're saying, which is they've just got added stipulations in place that they need it to fit in, like go through in order to make it a reality. And our job is to try and not battle too hard, but without compromising the project, I suppose.
Yeah, and without compromising your North Star.
Yeah,
And it's even more an extreme version of that when you're going into production. So,
absolutely.
when you're commissioned and you know you're heading towards a shoot, because then the person who's giving you feedback has that additional responsibility. Like it's literally in their job description to deliver a script to the highest editorial standards on time and on budget. So they've got all those production concerns kind of that they're trying to make sure your material hits while still
Absolutely.
retaining all of the creative that you were kind of signed up to at the beginning. So
And especially if you get
yeah.
that far down the line as well. So say you've written a spec script that's really free and it's what got the interest in the producer in the first place. But if the producer turns around and says, right, well, I know the vision was we were going to go to Apple where it was going to be 1 to 2 million per episode and we weren't going to worry about it. But actually, we're at channel 4 and we've got 800 grand per episode. So actually, we just need to find ways to make this work. And that doesn't mean that everything has to go. It just means we need to look at consolidating locations. We need to look at, do we need that car chase? Do we need that expensive set? Do we need, certain things like that? And there will always be deal breakers, won't there? But those notes are ultimately going to come. And sometimes those limitations can be good too, can't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And you hope that as a writer and a script development professional, whether they're a development exec or a script editor on a show or whatever, that you kind of you are open and honest about the challenges and you work together to find creative solutions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it
Again,
is, and what are you prepared to compromise on? Yeah.
not a battle. We just don't want it to be a battle, you know?